Norin, it's a pleasure to have you today, and welcome to the Nomadic Innovators Borderless Entrepreneurs podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I think it's really cool what y'all are doing with sharing entrepreneurs and digital nomads' journeys as they navigate that world. And I think it's an interesting overlap of personas. So I'm really excited to be here.
As a product manager in your role, what are some insights you can share regarding how you essentially gathered the data to say what is diverse and what is not diverse and how to include diverse perspectives?
That was also really easy. The challenge was meeting everyone remotely and establishing trust and building relationships remotely. So definitely having more one-on-ones with people and getting to know them on a personal and professional level was needed so I could establish those relationships. However, when I went into Microsoft, because I had already interned on that team, I had those pre-established relationships.
And I definitely feel like the audience has learned a lot from this discussion. So we'd love to, share these links to the audience whenever you have the chance to gather them, and we'll, display it towards the end of the podcast. Norin, it's a pleasure to have you today, and welcome to the Nomadic Innovators Borderless Entrepreneurs podcast. So today we're going to ask you a series of questions about your background, and we're excited to, share your answers to the audience, and we're excited for the audience to listen to your story and just get inspired.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I think it's really cool what y'all are doing with sharing entrepreneurs and digital nomads' journeys as they navigate that world. And I think it's an interesting overlap of personas. So I'm really excited to be here to talk to y'all.
Thank you. So the first section we'll cover is career journey and experience. Can you share with us a little bit about your professional journey from being a software engineering intern to becoming a senior product manager at Cloudbeds?
Yeah, for sure. So I can share a little bit about my background. I started in computer science engineering at the University of Michigan. I really enjoyed coding. And then that morphed into an internship at a biotech company. And then my next 2 summers, I did internships at Microsoft, where I did the Explore program, which was a great immersion into both software as well as product management. And then I decided to pursue more of the product management track. And I ended up working on Outlook Mobile, iOS and Android, which was a phenomenal experience, getting to work on a mobile platform, creating features for billions of users. And then from my time at Microsoft, I spent on that team. I was the accessibility driver and the product manager for some key experiences in the Outlook mobile apps. And then I really wanted to try working at a different stage of company. And I started to look around, and Cloudbeds was a great company that kind of came on my radar. They are what's called a PMS, so they're property management software. So they are a company that sells their platform, so they're a SaaS company, to hotels and vacation rentals to manage everything for them end to end. So it was a completely different industry, different market, everything. And so I pivoted there, and that's kind of an overview, high level of my career journey.
That's pretty impressive. So you've worked at both Microsoft and Cloudbeds, 2 companies with seemingly different cultures and focuses. Can you compare and contrast your experiences at these 2 companies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me know if there's a specific part that you'd like me to focus on, but I can start at a high level, and maybe that'll help guide the conversation. So essentially, very, very different. Microsoft is a behemoth of an organization, very large, great experience working there. And then Cloudbeds is much smaller. So it's more, when I joined, they just finished their Series D round of raising. And so they're very much at the growth startup stage, where things are more fast paced and a little bit more around really trying to build as fast as possible. So Microsoft was less chaotic, more bureaucratic than Cloudbeds. So I think pros and cons working in different places. And it's really just about, it's that mindset of where at Cloudbeds, it's all about us building really great product for our customers that are going to make them happy. And it's all about really making sure that the products that we build are helping to grow the company and move us in the direction of the organization's goals. Microsoft, very similarly so, we also had organizational goals that we were trying to hit. And it was important for us to also build things that our customers loved and that we delighted our customers. However, I would say that it was not necessarily, didn't need to be, we weren't in the growth mindset, right? We were really focused on a lot of like thinking through user experience and making more, being more maybe strategic with decisions. How you have more time. There's no like runway that you have to meet for a large company like that. So I think like from Microsoft, I picked up, it's very structured and there's a lot of process, and that was great seeing that side of product management. And then at Cloudbeds, seeing the side of product management that's really all about a little bit more chaos, innovation, building fast, going, trying things out, failing, redoing. So what you would think of as typically large company versus startup.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally imagine working for a very big company with a lot of structure, and then transitioning into a very fast-paced company that's super innovative, but very chaotic, like you said, because there's no structure. So that's really awesome that, you transitioned into, a different company with a different culture. Can you tell me more about how your time at Microsoft, focusing on app experiences across Outlook Mobile, prepare you for your role at Cloudbeds, if that had any impact at all?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the things that I learned at Microsoft weren't necessarily, rather I should say, the things that I learned at Microsoft that I'm able to apply at Cloudbeds were more general than that. I'm not working on mobile apps at Cloudbeds. It's a web-based application and platform. However, I would say that overall, as a product manager, a lot of the skills that you do pick up working on different products, they can be generalized to apply to other product types. So this is something that I always say to people when they're talking about, I've worked on a mobile app or I worked on web and I want to transition to working on something like a service, or I want to work on a completely different platform. And I think that that's very achievable. A lot of the skills are very transferable. So I think at Microsoft, I learned really great product management expertise. So how do we determine if something is a problem? How do we determine what we need to build to meet the customer's needs? How do we experiment? How do we do user research? How do we partner effectively with different departments and disciplines? How do we satisfy the needs that stakeholders will have? So stakeholder management, a lot of really key fundamental product management skills. And then those all were things that I was able to then take and apply to my job at Cloudbeds.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you face any challenges while driving accessibility features in mobile apps? And how was it like, and how did you overcome it?
Yes, for sure. So I think accessibility, to be just fully transparent, is something that I think a lot of people will say is important. However, when it comes to taking action, sometimes you do see that it doesn't take priority necessarily over some other work that might make the organization more revenue, or other work that's being prioritized feature-wise. So there are definitely challenges where we needed to convey the importance of accessibility at times. I think, Microsoft, it's great because the entire company's culture is all focused around inclusivity and diversity. So they have a whole initiative around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it was great having that built into the culture because it made that much easier. However, there were still times where it was important to convey the impact to leadership, to the product team, of how the accessibility of the product had real world impact. And so when in order to get traction, the way we solve that problem was really just bringing in our customers who are diversely abled, and just showing our product managers and showing our leadership the impact that it has when we build products that are accessible versus when we build products where we don't take into account accessibility and universal design. And then them being able to see firsthand these customers and these users interacting with things that they would build, it resonated very deeply because, as you can imagine, seeing someone who is blind try to use your feature, for instance, and they're unable to because you didn't take into account a different way that the feature could be used, it's very powerful. So we were very lucky that we had great customers and users who were willing to come and give us this feedback and willing to show us their experience using our product. And so we leveraged that and made sure that their voices were heard and they would be able to communicate to us what they needed. And we listened as best as we could to meet their needs.
That's really cool. Yeah, I can totally imagine, the importance of accessibility. And even for like a person, I have ADHD. So reading for me is a challenge, but if the font and the text and the color scheme and the patterns are good, it is easier for me to read it and actually understand the content. So it definitely plays a big role in the day-to-day, not just for people with severe accessibility issues, but also for regular people. So
yeah. And so many of the features, like for universal design, when you think about creating features and products that you build with inclusivity in mind, you end up creating better products overall, because regardless of like the ability, when you do create for more range of diverse groups of people, you end up just creating better products overall and better experiences for everyone. So it's really a win-win situation.
As a product manager in your role, what are some insights you can share regarding how you, I guess, essentially gather the data to say what is diverse and what is not diverse, and how to include diverse perspectives? Would you say, as a product manager, has that been further developed since remote work and the impact of, let's say, COVID has affected work? Is that something that you're picking data up on, and what are some insights you can share regarding, are you getting that from an in-house network, from your own workers or team, or are you gathering data from clients and customers?
Yeah, so if I understand your question, it's really around how are we maybe learning about what the customers' needs are who have disabilities. Is that right? Okay. I can answer that. And then the trend around
in terms of disabilities, but also people who have language barriers, not necessarily disabilities, but different cultural barriers or cultural dynamics. Is that something that is informed from your in-house team of your own diverse group, or is that something that there's data being driven around retrieving it from other countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it would vary depending on where I was. So when I was at Microsoft, because we had such a large organization and a very strong research team, a lot of this came directly from our user researchers. So they would reach out to customers across different geos, across different backgrounds, locations, across different, types of people, like just running the range of you have demographics. They
have a wide reach, for sure. They have a wide reach.
So it's very easy for us to have that data and then be able to analyze it and have a large pool of data to look at. And so when we were making decisions around features, we had that. And then we also had smaller groups of customers that were almost insider customers, you could say. And so we would share things with them earlier. We would get their feedback earlier. We would show them even designs before anything had been coded. And then they would give us feedback that helped inform the decisions that we made. At Cloudbeds, being a smaller company, we don't really have that kind of reach. And so a lot of times working in a smaller company, we do have user research. So we do talk to our customers and we try to gather insights when we look at our competitors and we look at the market and trends there. And we use an aggregate of that to make as informed of a decision as we possibly can. So you are working with less data when you are at a smaller company. And so at that point, you try to gather as much as possible, but then you instinctively have to make more of a gut decision and just release and experiment and see how it does, and then iterate and pivot. Let me know.
Which do you prefer? Do you prefer big data, or do you prefer much more like groundwork? What has been your something that's driven you?
I don't know if I have necessarily. Ideally, the more data, the better, because you feel more confident in the decision that you're making. So I guess I would lean towards always having more information and being able to talk to customers or gather quantitative metrics. However, in both cases, you eventually do run into a ceiling. Like you just have to make a decision one way or the other. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say I have a strong preference for either one. It's just the level of confidence that I would have going into it. And then, like I said, both end in the same place where you do have to just make an instinctive decision to the best of your ability.
And remind me again, were you focusing on a specific product at Microsoft, or was it overarching product management across the whole companies?
Yeah, so I was focused on Outlook Mobile, iOS and Android. So I worked specifically on that mobile app. Yeah.
And how do you think that helped you in terms of team management? Do you think it was easier for you to manage your work at Cloudbeds? Was it an easier transition?
I think definitely it was much more work at Cloudbeds because we're a smaller company, so we have less product managers and more areas to own. So transition.
You say you probably. Sorry, you said you probably do one more hats than you did at Microsoft per se.
Right, I would say so. Yeah, so at Cloudbeds,
Yeah.
you take on, because it's a smaller company, you take on more roles. So doing other things and just in general owning more area and more scope. And so having more partners and engineers and designers and things like that you interface with and work with. At Microsoft, also you have so many more, we had so many more PMs. The company is so much larger. There's so much more hierarchy. So we're a pretty flat structure at Cloudbeds. Microsoft had more hierarchy and structure. And so yes, definitely more work at Cloudbeds. And I think you typically see that in startups, like people are working more and have more ownership.
And remind me, when was the year that you started at Cloudbeds again?
I think it's been a year and a half. So 2022, I think 2021, 2022, I think. I can't remember.
And prior to that, remind me, how long were you with Microsoft?
I was also with Microsoft for about a year and a half. Yeah. So I started Microsoft in 2020. Yeah. The year of the pandemic.
Yeah. So I was going to say, how was the experience in navigating, I guess, a new landscape of work, a new landscape of engaging with the team? How was that for you? What challenges did that present?
That's a great question.
First at Microsoft and Cloudbeds.
Yeah, so Microsoft, I was fortunate enough that I had done an internship with the team I was coming back to full time before COVID. So I felt quite comfortable knowing people. And so when coming back to work remote, it was a very smooth transition. I had already met everybody. I had worked with a lot of the designers, a lot of the engineers, a lot of the other folks in different disciplines. So I felt very comfortable. And then with Cloudbeds, Cloudbeds has been actually a remote company for 12 years. So even before the pandemic, they were doing fully remote because their whole concept is, allowing people to travel, and we're a hospitality company, so we want anyone and everyone to be able to work from wherever they so choose. So I felt like that was also a very smooth transition because they had a very full system in place. They had remote work forever before even the pandemic. So that was also really easy. The challenge was meeting everyone remotely and establishing trust and building relationships remotely. So definitely having more one-on-ones with people and getting to know them on a personal and professional level was needed, so I could establish those relationships. However, when I went into Microsoft, because I had already interned on that team, I had those pre-established relationships. So I would say overall that was good. I think that definitely when you are coming into a fully remote company, or I'm sure people who were starting new jobs during COVID, it's very hard to build that rapport and relationship with your coworkers. I would say then compared to like in person, because in person just naturally happens. So I would say the only difference was like having to actually make effort to meet with people and schedule time and get on their calendars to talk to them.
Was a lot of your team local to you at all, or were they all national, international?
Yeah, my team at Microsoft, very much local in the Washington state area. And then at Cloudbeds, not at all. So my teams were distributed across Europe and mainly Europe and South America and the US. And I think at the time, my VP that I report to is here. However, at the time we didn't have anyone else, and now we have 2 more people in the Seattle area where I am. But yeah, otherwise completely, fully globally distributed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a transition. A lot of different time zones. Yeah.
Yes, lots of early calls. Europe and the West Coast is not a friendly time zone collaboration time. So.
I agree with that.
Sure. Now, the fun part, transitioning into your journey in the podcasting space. So, tell me more about how you came up with the idea for the Product World podcast and what inspired you to create a platform for product managers across the tech industry.
I think the idea started when I was thinking about how to better be able to share the things that I was learning as a product manager with more people. I started a blog where I would write about my experiences PMing. I also would see around me a lot of people interested in product management. So I'm a woman and a person of color. So I felt like a lot of the tech industry is dominated by, like white men. So I really was seeing a lot of times people who were women or people who were in my position feeling like there wasn't really an easy path to entry or doubting themselves or having imposter syndrome, which is totally fair. I have imposter syndrome all the time. And I think a lot of people have imposter syndrome, regardless of like your race or gender or background. It's just natural to sometimes feel like you're not good enough or you don't belong. And so I just noticed that because it's harder to break into a space when no one really looks like you, it feels disheartening. And so I felt like I had been so lucky to have really fantastic mentors who had helped me up till that point in my journey to get to where I am. It takes a village. No one does it alone. And so I was thinking about how can I share the things that I'm learning from these really, really brilliant people and really just do my best to democratize that knowledge and information so that anyone can learn more about product management or just like building products in general. Just because you're not a PM and you don't have a PM title doesn't mean that you can't build really great products that change people's lives, right? And so the goal was really just to get that information out more broadly. And I just filmed my first episode with my manager at the time at Microsoft. He was so kind, Adam Barris, huge shout out, great guy. To do it with me. And then I just kept going. And yeah.
That's really awesome. Can you tell me more about your process, after your first guest, of course, what was your, how did you approach people and how did you select guests for the Product World podcast?
I really leaned on my network. Again, thank you everyone in my network who came on the podcast. I leaned heavily on my network, and I was lucky enough that I had really great mentors, like I mentioned, who were willing to come on my podcast. So I reached out to folks who worked on my team. I asked people who I knew if they knew of folks that would be interested in doing something like this, who had expertise in any field related to tech. So whether you're a founder, a product manager, a designer, an engineer, I would love to talk to you and learn about you, because I think those all overlap, including if they do marketing, everything. There's so many parts of tech, and we only really hear about software engineering and product management and design maybe, but there's so much more, user research. I could go on. However, that was kind of the main way that I brought on in guests, is really leveraging my network and then getting to a point where the podcast grew enough that I could cold reach out to some folks on LinkedIn that I had some connections with, and was lucky enough that they agreed to come on, and so on and so on.
Yeah, just doing it organically through your network is the best way to go about finding guest speakers. And once you do have that recognition, people will approach you, and I think that's a really good lesson that everyone can learn who's watching this podcast. About the importance of your own network. So can you tell me about one key learning or piece of advice that you've taken from a guest on your podcast, and how it played a significant impact in your professional work?
That's tough because everyone has been so great. That's so hard to pick one, putting me in a tough position. I will pick one of the, I will, I don't know if this is I can't say the most because I think I've learned so much from a lot of the different guests we had. I will pick one that has been most recently impactful in my life. I had a guest, Tesla. He came on. He is an amazing design lead at Netflix. And he also has a really, really cool watch brand that he and his co-founder are building called Primitive House on the side. And so it was very inspirational to see that he is both working, a full-time job, but also working and hustling to build a completely separate company on the side. And he is a founder as well. And so I think it was just very inspirational to see that. And I think what I loved about it was how really it was a project of passion for him and his co-founder. And also the fact that they were iteratively and slowly building this on the side because it was something that they were passionate about, because it was a way that they wanted to creatively and emotionally touch the world with great things that they loved and things that made them feel very special. You should check out the episode. He talks about the impact that watches had on his life. And so I think there are a lot of times when we are in tech, there's this mentality where if you are trying to be a founder or build a product, you need to just always be working and always be hustling, and you need to quit your job and you can't. But I know so many amazing founders that slowly and intentionally have built companies on the side, and then they've either had their other full-time role in their company or they've decided to then move on and transition to their company. And I think that's a side of the story that we don't often see. And so it was really inspirational to see that.
And it's very, impressive how people can evolve with the circumstances that they're given and make something out of it. Have you noticed any trends or common themes in your discussion with other product managers on your podcast? Like any similarities, since your niche is a product space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some overlaps are really around the importance of understanding your customer and also applying critical thinking. So to what your customers say. So I think a lot of times commonly we'll make mistakes where as trying to be to apply product thinking, you'll come up with a solution first and then try to design something and then try to get that out to people. But really it's about understanding first what is the core of the problem. How do we know it's a problem? And then figuring out, okay, well, what is it that people are asking for? And I think the art of PMing, where I see overlap, where product managers talk about that have come on my podcast, it's this ability to really take something that a customer says to you and then dissect and understand what is the best possible solution that you can build, not necessarily what the customer is sometimes even asking for. And I think that gets tricky because you might get a list of things and you might have 10 customers being like, I want this thing to work this way and do this. But that's not necessarily always how real innovation happens. So a customer might tell you, well, my problem is that my phone, I can't really watch videos on it or something. I don't know. And then I want to have a separate device to watch videos on. And then I have my phone for texting and things like that. And I'm thinking this is pre-iPhone, right? And I guess one solution is you could be like, great, I'll just build you another device where you can watch videos. But then the idea would be instead, I think great product thinking and that would be being okay, what if we built a device that integrated those two things and we gave the customer this new product that handled both situations, etc. So really people will maybe say something and then you have to think creatively and innovate about how do we solve this problem in a different way, in a way that hasn't maybe been solved quite yet. And I think that's where I've seen overlap with great product managers that have been on my podcast.
Yeah, that resonates a lot and very deeply because most people don't really know what they want, but if they find something better and they purchase it and they realize it's a game changer, it's like a miracle itself because a lot of people will start using that product and pick that product over the competitors. So
yeah,
thank you
for
for
sure.
that.
Yeah, for sure. It's that sweet spot of really understanding the customer need and customer problem, understanding the market and whether there is value there and if people are ready for what you're building, and then building something innovative and creative. So a lot of pieces but it is doable.
You mentioned a couple of things regarding like your past mentorship and the creation of limitations, or at least limiting the level of feedback that you're putting into your system. So if you were to create two systems, effectively, it's not as effective as you would want it, or as effective that the consumer might need it. Your mentorship probably has been very impactful to yourself. And as you mentor others, for example, at CodePath, I see, what are some ways that you help assist professionals or people who are starting in the tech industry realize, or at least know how to approach some of the things they may face?
For sure. I think for me, it's really just, I try to understand that I think the mentor-mentee relationship is a really great. And I think I learn a lot as well from just my mentees and my mentors. I really try to understand, for people that I work with and mentor, what is it that they're trying to accomplish? Like, what is their goal? Everyone is different. What is it that they feel like is their blocker? So asking a lot of questions and trying to just understand what a person's situation is, what they're thinking, what they would like, where they would like to be, instead of necessarily like giving advice or trying to solve problems for them, just helping to ask the right questions to guide them to the right solution. And then when it comes to product management specifically, I have mentored other PMs, and that has been more around really just helping to, again, ask them questions to guide them in that right way, in that way of thinking of like good product building, which I'm still very much learning as I go along too. I'm still quite early in career. But like if I, like something that I mentioned, where if I'm having a conversation with a PM and they are talking about building this solution, you know, I would ask them questions like, well, what's the core problem here? What are we trying to solve? Who are you solving it for? What do we think? How does this ladder up to like the goals of the organization? What are you measuring for success? All these things. And I think that really helps kind of guide the person and have those gears turn on, and you really think about, okay, what is it that I'm building, and how am I going to measure whether this does well or not, and so on. So really just being inquisitive, curious, and asking questions.
Now, from a big picture perspective, do you think that changes from industry to industry? Let's say tech versus fashion, or high-end fashion, let's say something that's very niche. Do they have the same model, do you think, or are they trying to capture a different essence of culture?
Oh, I've never
that's like
in high fashion or fashion.
Yeah, so I know, right?
I do not know if I can answer the question.
For example, let's say for a watch, right? Because we have phones that can perfectly tell us time. So there's a different mode or a different understanding of human relations that you're engaging with, right? What are some insight you have on that?
Yes, so I think, overall, I think everything is a product in a way, right? And you can apply it. I think you can apply that thinking. Like if you wanted to, you could apply product management thinking to almost everything, because everything is kind of like a product. You can make it that way. I do think it varies though. Like for instance, building the questions you would maybe ask when you're building a B2B product, like a business to business product, like something like Word or Office that Microsoft creates, versus the questions and things that you want to be thinking about when you create something like a watch, or something more business to like B2C, or like when you're looking at a business to a consumer, going direct to consumer. Those are going to be different things that you want to think about, and different questions and different challenges that you'll need to navigate depending on that. And so I guess like the way I would think about it, and again, I am a PM, so I this thinking comes intuitively to me now, and I want to think of everything as a product. Is like there's this overarching umbrella where everything is a product, and then you can kind of have branches where you break it down further depending on what kind of product it is, and if you're selling to a business, if you're just going to just consumers directly, if you're selling to communities or anything like that, those things then you get more granular, and you have different questions that you want to ask and different things that you want to think about.
Thank you. Yeah, I had to throw you a curveball. And you've spoken on it many times, Is it at any point, do you ever stop looking for a mentor? Is that something that you would ever stop doing? Because I know it's impactful. I'm pretty sure the higher you go, the more impactful of a leader and a mentor you'd want to gain insight from. What is your perspective on how you search for a mentorship, or what that looks like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. For me, and this works for me, I have found great success with mentors who are about, I would say, like maybe 2 or so levels above me at most. So when it comes to mentorship, this is someone that's going to be giving you probably pretty specific advice and you're asking them for help. So if you go to someone who is maybe a very high C-level executive who is mentoring you and you are more like you are a product manager on a team, like you're probably not going to get the most beneficial advice in your day-to-day from them. And you could get some good advice, but in general, like I think you won't, because they are very removed from your situation. Like the problems that they are tackling with the scope that they're looking at is very different than yours. So when it comes to mentorship, I think the sweet spot for me that I found has been like someone that's maybe like 2 levels at work above me, or the equivalent, I guess, would be like maybe if you are in high school, you would want to find a mentor that's like in college or something like that. So someone that has recently gone through what you've gone through and has had time to learn about it in a couple years so that they can impart that wisdom back onto you. And it hasn't been enough time for them to forget some things and whatnot. And then I think about this concept that I learned about from one of my mentors, which is like having a board of advisors almost. And that's where you have like maybe founders or CEOs and things like that, where they are not as close to your situation. So they're not daily mentors. Like you don't reach out to them weekly, or you don't talk to them monthly. You maybe talk to them once every 3 months, like once a quarter, or like maybe twice a year or something like that. And they give you like really profound, meaningful help and support in a very specific thing that they can, or you learn something from them and you're like, okay, I'll apply this in the future. And you keep that connection alive. So like having that, and then let's say you want to get a job because they're so influential, they can help you, or if they need to vouch for you, you have someone who can vouch for you. So it's really like your own board. Like if you think like of yourself as a company, you want to have a board that's like on your side working for you. And that's the same thing when you have people who are at that level, then they become part of your board essentially. And then you have mentors who are closer to where you are at, who can give you that actionable and helpful advice.
Yeah, I've actually implemented that. Having a board and reaching out to people in my life that are in a space that I value their insight and how they've implemented their own rhetoric that they've shared with me into their own life. It's cool to see it manifest for them, and I definitely look out to them, and I've shared with them like, hey, I want you on my board of life, right? Or my cabinet. And in that way, it kind of empowers them, and it empowers myself, to follow some obligation. So I agree. That's a really good way to like empower your life.
Yeah, and that actually made me remember too. I think the other really great piece of advice is always following up, like close it, like following up. So like if a mentor gives you advice, or someone on your board or your cabinet, as you called it, gives you some impactful advice and then you apply it, even if you apply it like months later and then you see something come back, just like sending them a message and saying, hey, I did this and this is what happened, so thank you so much. Like I think a lot of people forget to do that like last follow-up, and it's super, super meaningful, because if you think about it, these people who are giving their time to you, who are in these positions, they're doing it because they want to help you, and because for them it means something, and it makes them feel fulfilled to see you succeed and apply that. So going back and following up with them and saying, hey, I did this is what happened, thank you, it makes a huge difference and helps you keep that relationship going, so it doesn't fizzle out and you don't lose that connection.
That changed the way and the trajectory of how people work. And it did create a shift in the economy where people, transition from fully in the office to fully remote. And now we are entering a place where there is like a mix. From your own perspective, how do you perceive the influence of the digital nomad lifestyle on the tech industry and product development, especially in the context of your experience at Cloudbeds?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer them a little separately. I'll start with the influence of the digital nomad from what I observed during COVID, and then I'll dive into maybe how I observed it in Cloudbeds. So overall, I think when COVID started and the ability to work from anywhere happened, I did see a lot of people in my network and friends decide to go and work from Mexico for 2 months or work from a completely different country, part of the world, for like months at a time, or even just move back home, do things that before would not have been accessible for them to do. And so that was really, really cool to see because I think people started to prioritize almost themselves and their happiness more than necessarily like moving to a city where they may be unhappy for a job or paying insane rent prices and whatnot. So that was really awesome to see. The impact that I think it had on tech was also this concept that there are like less barriers now to connect with people, which is fantastic. So if you want to innovate, if you want to work with someone in a completely different country, maybe before that would have been something that people wouldn't have considered necessarily, but now it's like, oh, well, we can hire from potentially anywhere because they can work remotely and we can see that. And I think that's super exciting. And that has helped make cooler, more innovative products, more distributed teams. I think the con side of that is the work-life balance challenges. It's really hard to work across time zones all the time with different time zones sometimes because I don't think we have like necessarily, I think that there's a lot of room for products that are in place right now to help with distributed work do better. I think of like Zoom, Teams as examples of those products. They're great, but I mean, there's a lot more that can be done. So overall, I would say it was something positive in terms of the impact on tech. I think like I see less of the like general, I'm going to go pick up and move country to country than I did when COVID first started. Now I think people are like picking still digital nomads, but they're not hopping around as much, I guess I should say. So they'll maybe like go to some place for a longer period of time, like months at a time instead of a couple weeks, or they'll pick a completely different city and live there for a year and then go to a different city for a year. So I think the duration is different. Yep. And at Cloudbeds, again, because we were always a remote company, I think it just has stayed the same. So for Cloudbeds, people were always traveling, working from different places. I have coworkers who were in Hong Kong the other day working from there. Like there was never any sort of issue there. And so they were just kind of ahead of the trend, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. No, it's really fascinating how, technology has connected us all, where the pros of working remotely definitely in most cases outweigh the cons. Maybe for very specific niche jobs like hardware engineering, I can understand the importance of being in person, but not very soon because we are going to have augmented reality headsets coming out soon, which will allow us to work even in major product, developments remotely. So I think it's very fascinating how the culture has shifted. And it's also very good to know that Cloudbeds was remote even before COVID, because there weren't that many companies that were remote before COVID. And I was very, very fortunate to have been working remotely since 2016. But I know a lot of people that were not lucky and they had to work in the office, but COVID was like a blessing in disguise for them because they were able to focus on self-development and be a little bit selfish, because sometimes in order to be selfless, you have to be a little bit selfish, right? So could you share some productivity tips or strategies that have helped you manage your workload effectively while working remotely or traveling?
Ooh, that was a good question. I'm so grateful for mobile technology. I love mobile technology. One thing that helps me really stay productive is being able to do things on the go. So I have the Google Suite downloaded all on my phone. So I have edited docs on my phone. I've edited spreadsheets on my phone. I have all of like Slack on my phone. This is not maybe healthy. Disclaimer, I don't know if this is healthy, but if you are trying to be productive, it's very helpful. I will delete these if I'm on vacation, just so, I think that's important to do. But yeah, I have all of those apps on my phone, my mail apps. So I have all of the productivity suite of apps that I could possibly need to make sure I'm able to respond to things. I have like the Jira app and like everything, really. And so that has helped me stay productive because I can just whip out my phone at any point and do something if I need to do it or need to get it done. If I'm, on a plane traveling somewhere, I'm like rushing somewhere because I'm going and doing that and working remotely. That's been really helpful. The other thing to stay productive is honestly leaving my home. I can't work from my apartment anymore. It's just not productive because it's not. And so, especially as Seattle is getting gloomier, I go to coffee shops. So I'll go to a coffee shop in the morning or I'll go to a coffee shop in the afternoon and work there. I've started to do co-working with some friends. And I have not tried this yet, but I recently learned of this platform called Flow Club, where you can join and work in a little pod with people. And so I'm excited to try that and see how that is. So yeah, I think just like being outside around other people helps me stay more productive. So that's what I've been doing. And then mobile technology has just been, I love mobile technology, helping me kind of get what I need to get done on the go.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very important factor you brought up there, because traveling is something, if you're working remotely, it's very, very important. I remember my very first year when I worked remotely. I really hated it because I was not self-motivated. I'd work in the same room I'd sleep in. So I did not have that much self-discipline. And more importantly, I did not go outside. And ever since I started going outside, working in coffee shops, working in different countries, my excitement increased. And I really, really was passionate about working remotely because I'd be in a different time zone, but I didn't really have to explain myself why I was in a different time zone to people in my company. So it definitely was a very fulfilling experience. But, I think it's very important for people who are working remotely that they find structure by traveling more, being a little bit more social. And maybe if they are comfortable working from home, separating where you sleep and where you work. That's, some really good tips. But can you tell me how the shift to remote work influenced the product development processes and team collaborations for you and your work at Cloudbeds?
Sure. I think so. Like, how is it the question more so like how we manage work, given that we are a remote company, like building products and things like that, like the tools we use and like processes? Is that?
Yeah. Just like how the shift, I know Cloudbeds, like you said, was remote before COVID, but for someone new to the company who has traditionally been in the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday office, what is it like for them to shift to remote work and adapt to the processes? Because I'm pretty sure the company that you are in has a lot of applications and tools that allow and enhance remote work. But when you're working in the traditional office space, it's more of a controlled environment, so you don't have access to those kind of apps. So hope that explains the question a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you. So I think for us, when you join, there's onboarding that you go through, and the onboarding is fantastic. That team does a great job just teaching you about how the company works, the values of the company, and the product that the company builds. And so I think that's really helpful to help ground you when you're coming in, transitioning from what maybe is a traditional 9 to 5 in office every day. And then I think it's really just people are very kind. At least at Cloudbeds, people were very kind. They reached out. There's the donuts on Slack, which is like get to know meetings that you can have with people. And so those are really, really great. So that when you first join a company, I think it's scary because you don't know anyone. And when it's remote, you're not just walking by meeting people. So having a built-in Slack app that messages you and says, you've been matched with someone and now just go meet with them. I think that's something that we do that really is helpful. I mean, to your point, it's all about human connection, right? So establishing any sort of human connection is really valuable. And I think that's where the focus comes into play. And so once that happens, I think it's up to the individual to really get into the groove of what does it look like for you working remotely? How do you want to structure your day, and where do you want to work from, and how do you want to work? And that's nice because at Cloudbeds, and I would hope and think for other companies that are remote as well, you have that flexibility that you can then figure out what you want to be doing. And then in terms of product development, I mean, like you said, too, we have a lot of tools that we use, a lot of collaborative apps and things like Zoom and Slack and Figma being just a few of those apps that we use to just collaborate and stay on top of our work together. Slack is, I think, the biggest one. Of course, nothing would happen if we didn't Slack, because that's how we literally communicate. So I think we're a very Slack heavy company. We communicate that way a lot. And so that helps too. I think staying on top of work and talking through changes and things like that. And then, yeah, I think that's it. And then just having meetings, and Figma is also a great collaborative tool that I've leveraged a lot. Love Figma. Yeah. Let me know if that answers your question.
No, that answers my question, very thoroughly. And I also like the fact that you mentioned earlier in the previous question how, the importance of like, sometimes you have a lot of these apps and sometimes you just want to plug out. So you want to delete these apps when you're traveling on vacation. And I think it's very important, but I do think it's a very good idea for people in the product space to create a new feature on a phone where you tap a button and it automatically goes into work mode, and it deletes all the apps that are not necessary for work, and you can transition back into vacation mode where it automatically deletes all your work apps. And I think that's a really good feature, an idea. But thank you for answering those questions.
Yeah,
you mentioned in closing, you've been mentioning a lot of things that you've experienced, that you've developed within yourself, and they're all very much humanistic. So in the future, do you see the human touch being needed in product management and development? And in your podcasting space, is that something that you explore?
Yeah, I think that, humans are the core of everything. Like people, no product is built without people. And so, yeah, I think like when I think about anything that I do, and when I have guests over on the podcast, I genuinely like to hear from them on who they are, and also how they build products, because I think the DNA of the people that build anything goes into the product. So the DNA of the people ends up being the DNA of the product. And I do believe that. So I think people are core and fundamental to that. And so like right now, a team and I are building like a stealth wellness app. Yes, it's called Lavaee. I will send link over. Y'all should check it out. It's cool.
Please.
And for us, we were very intentional with Lavaee about when we're thinking about solving this problem of making it easier for people to find the right communities and mental health support matches for them, and looking at like the wellness space and seeing that this is like a core problem and how much the market is expanding. We looked at all these things, and when we were building Lavaee, we really thought about who we are and what our core principles are and what we believe in, and how it's important for us to think about those things, especially when we're looking at a wellness product, right? So I think the same thing goes at any type of product that you're building, like thinking about what are your core values and applying that to the product. So I think the human aspect is critical to any sort of product that you're building. Another great example of that is like Amazon's core values. Like Amazon, questionable company, have made some questionable decisions. One thing that they have done very well though is they're very clear on their values. And some people might not agree with some of the values that they have, but they do follow them to a T, and you see that built out in their products. Anything good that they do comes maybe from like a good core value that they have. And so we can focus on that. And so I think that comes into play. And so for Amazon, for instance, like the customer is incredibly important. Like the customer's experience is incredibly important. And I mean, you can say a lot about Amazon, but everybody gets their packages usually, and everyone's using Amazon. So clearly they did hit something there with that customer experience that they're trying to curate to get you what you need really fast, right? So I think that's like
right?
Sorry, say that again.
They're servicing humans.
They are, yes. So
right.
That's what they're doing. And so I think like that human side of like, what are the values and who are you end up building into the product. And you can see that with all these great products. I mean, Apple is another great example of that. And so I think that really does come into play. Even Google, like the philosophy of Google and the way that they built their products, their original founders were very like technical people, and they thought about like way. And so when you look at Google, like that's how it's built. Microsoft, very similar. Like, so I think Yeah, I think humans are incredibly important in the product that gets built, and it's definitely important to have that as part of the conversation.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate your time. We would love to have an insight and maybe all the links you have available for the future projects that you have. If you have a moment, please share those. And if you have to be heading out, then we would love to be able to have that information for our audience, because we love the work that you're doing and it's directly impactful to us.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel like the audience has learned a lot from this discussion. So we'd love to, share these links to the audience whenever you have the chance to gather them, and we'll, display it towards the end of the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I'll send y'all over everything that I got. And if anyone is interested in learning more about product management or anything like that, I'm happy to share like my LinkedIn. Always open to connecting. And I think, this was a great conversation. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I think it's really cool how you're sharing these stories for folks, and it's very inspiring.
Thank you, Norin. We appreciate your time today.